to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom, and in this video we're going to look at the film adaptation by Steven Spielberg in 1985 of Alice Walker's book, The Color Purple. So this is the film, The Color Purple. So this film stars Danny Glover, Whoopi Goldberg in her breakout role, Oprah Winfrey. I wouldn't say breakout role, but it's her first film role. So those are the three major actors. And again, this is Spielberg after he's done E.T. He was actually uncomfortable doing this film because he wasn't black. Alice Walker was also uncomfortable with him directing this film because, again, he wasn't black. And this is a very, very African-American film, if not African in general film. So it's based on the book. So Walker did, however, was impressed by Whoopi Goldberg, who she saw doing a stand-up routine in San Francisco and how she was able to do characters. So Whoopi Goldberg was very, very good in this film. Actually, so was Oprah Winfrey, proving that at one point in time, at least, she could act, as could, Whoopi Goldberg. Once upon a time, they could act before, Oprah did. I'm a giant talk show host, doing all sorts of promoting charlatans and thieves and just being all over irritating. I don't like Oprah. Anybody with a sane mind doesn't like Oprah. She's not a legitimate human being. She's just irritating. Please see the fact that Dr. Oz was dragged in front of the Senate for lying, and the guy who pretended to talk to dead people, and then Dr. Phil. But that's a different thing. I don't like Oprah. And back to the actual film. So let's go over the actual film before I go over the whole why this isn't the best adaptation. Alice Walker didn't particularly like it. It's not a good adaptation. She likes the film because it's enjoyable, but it's not something she considers part of her book for good reason. But let's go over the film. So the film starts with Celie at about 13 giving birth to both her children and what she thinks is her siblings, because again, she's under the assumption that her father, the man who raped her, is her biological father. She doesn't find out he's not until later. And she gives birth to both kids. She assumes they're dead, though she has a sinking suspicion they might not be. So they show that, and then they show her and Nellie's relationship and go to her essentially being sold to Mr. by their father. That's kind of the opening part of the film. It shows Nellie teaching Celie to read because she goes to school and she's come to live with them. So she's writing words on all sorts of objects so Celie knows how to read. And in her Mr's attempted assault on Nellie, and then him basically throwing her out, and huge scene where he says, "You'll never hear from her." Basically tells Celie, it's like, you'll never hear from her again, at all, ever. And then Nellie's gone, and then it jumps. Now it does show Celie having issues with Albert's children, or Mr's children, depending on what you want to call him. To Celie, he's always Mr. Except for near the end. But again, this is where we're at. It doesn't jump to where now Celie is older. It's now played by Whoopi Goldberg. She's in her 20s, which I believe is where the age of Whoopi Goldberg was when she filmed this role. It goes over where Harpo, which is Mr's oldest son, marries a woman by the name of Sophia, who was played by Whoopi Goldberg. Very strong, overweight, African-American woman. It shows their insane relationship where they're fighting back and forth because Harpo's used to women like Celie who are extremely meek and allow themselves to be beaten up on, and Sophie is not that. She's a strong woman from a strong family of women, and she beats the crap out of her. And then it shows his affair when he opens his little jute shop, where they have a whole big scene where they're opening basically what amounts to be a little jazz bar out in the swamp where there's music and alcohol, and this is the 1920s, so it's basically the swamp version of a speakeasy, out in the middle of nowhere because they're hiding from the cops because this is prohibition. So it shows that. It shows, trying to think, it's been a while since I've seen this film. If it introduces Suge earlier. Yeah, it does. Suge comes, this is she doesn't have anything to do with the jute shack here. She's sick. Celie nurses her. Albert has sex with her, and then once she's better, she leaves, and then she comes back married, and they have a whole thing where she's singing in the jute shack. But then you have this interesting scene where because she's married and she's dressed up nicer, she's trying to convince her father that she's legitimate and that she's worthy. He's a minister, that she's worthy of love. And they have a whole big singing scene where she's walking down the road to his church and everybody's singing, and they have a whole huge choir scene. And it's done very, very well. It's very interesting. I'll get back to why it's a little weird and not entirely properly placed. It then goes into Suge helping Celie find Nellie's letters, because she finds it she goes to the mail by herself, gets the mail by herself, and has this letter from Africa. And she and Celie talk, and they find the letters buried in a trunk, and you see Celie starting to read these letters. And this is where you start getting a little bit of what's going on with Nellie, who's now in Africa. She's a missionary. So they kind of show these almost flashbacks to her being in Africa, and they built huts and a church and a school, and she tells her that Adam and Olivia are alive, that these are her children, the Celie's children, and they've been adopted, and they're all growing up happy outside, plenty of exercise, education in Africa. And it talks about Olivia's relationship with another little African girl who's not allowed to come to school, and Olivia teaches her, and they have all these scenes which are similar to Nellie teaching Celie. And then it goes through the road coming and knocking over the huts and the school and everything, and then Corinne dying, which is the minister, woman, the wife of the husband and wife that Nellie goes to Africa with, the couple that has raised Olivia and Adam. And it goes through that, and then it shows what appears to be Adam, Olivia, and then the little girl that Olivia was friends with getting basically their face cut as part of an African ritual. And this is crossed over with Celie reading these letters and things kind of going on in the United States at the time, and being told to stop daydreaming. And Albert does catch her reading the letters, so I don't think it's implied whether he knows what the heck she's reading, because she's hiding in a book. And that's where I think it stops. And then you go to a scene where Celie and Suge are walking around a bunch of purple flowers and talking about how Suge, and this comes directly from the book, and in fact Alice Walker in the book version that I had talks about this speech of Suge, saying essentially that God is just looking to be loved, and that he would get mad if you walk by the color purple and don't notice it. And that's the whole kind of talking about, God just like humans, that all they want is to be loved. And then it skips to a scene after Celie's read these letters. She's now very, very angry at Albert, where she's supposed to be shaving him, and they have this huge scene where Suge comes running up because it appears that Celie is about to slice his throat. And it's a very dramatic scene. And then it goes back into them having dinner. Now, there was a few scenes where you saw that Sophia, who is now working as a maid, she's been beating the crap out of, and she's become very, very submissive, is in the store, and Celie helps her. This is further in the past, but now we've jumped forward. Sophia appears to be no longer enslaved, so to speak. It doesn't go into detail with that very much. And they're at what appears to be Celie and Albert's home. They're having dinner with a bunch of the children, Celie and Squeak, which is her real name's Mary Agnes, his mistress, and children, and Mr. and his father, and then of course Shug's husband, Grady. And so they're at this table. I don't know what meal it is. I think it's around Easter. It's very much implied that it's around Easter when Shug comes back. So this is where Sophia gives a giant, basically, Celie threatens to kill Mr. Sophia stops her, basically, don't do what I did. And this is from what I've read, this is an ad-lib thing that Oprah did on her own, where it's like, when Stabila Grasser, it's like, how would your character feel, want to talk to Celie after she helped you all that time ago? And so this is an ad-lib speech where basically Sophia says, you don't want to go where I've been. You don't want to go to jail, essentially. Don't do this at all. Go live your life. Do not basically live what I've been through, which is essentially she's been enslaved and she's got the crap beaten out of her. So, and she's lost years of her life, so that's not entirely implied. It's in the book. But, so Celie doesn't kill Albert, obviously. Shug announces that her name is, not Shug, but Squeak announces, like, my name is Mary Agnes, and I want to sing. And so she's leaving too. So you have them leaving, you have Celie's, essentially she curses Albert. These lines are pulled directly from the book, where essentially she tells Albert, it's like, everything that you did to me was done to you, but everything you touch is going to be destroyed until you do right by me. And she does this very, very good speech, and then he basically calls her, she's poor, she's ugly, you can be Shug's Meg, and she's like, well, I'm here. And then she leaves with Shug, Squeak, and Grady. So they drive off Albert's, and then Albert pretty much, again, the curse comes true, where his fields die because he's a farmer, and his house falls apart, and he becomes very, very depressed, and eventually he does, however, clean himself up. And then it jumps to Celie on a train, and she's obviously now wealthier. She's dressed well. She has money. She sees these kids that these little sisters and kids remind her of her and her sister when they were young, and throw these chocolate coins at them. And then she arrives. She's walking, and she's basically going to her old home, and she gets an explanation from basically the wife of Pa that the house and the land had belonged to Celie's biological father. Now, she does know from a letter from Nellie that their Pa was not their father, that their Pa wasn't Pa. And I think that's what she learned from Nellie briefly. But this woman basically explains why on earth the land belongs to her. It's because her father owned the land and the store, and the house, and everything. So, and it passed to her mother, and then it passed to her and her sister Nellie when their mother died. And you get this explanation from this wife of basically their stepfather, why she's leaving. Like, he left me all the money, but everything else, the land, the store, and everything is yours. So, and essentially Celie asks her, it's like, how? It's like, yeah, this is how this went down. Your real father owned the land. So, and that's how she does it. I don't think she actually, in the book, she gets it from a letter from Nellie. In the film, she gets this explanation from the widow, who's going off in a car and has kids and looks, I think, older than I think she is in the book. But, and then you have, basically, Celie has this house, and Shug is there, and then she has the store where she's making folk pants, where she makes folk pants that fit anybody. And you have a whole scene in a store with Sophia and Harpo, and they're fitting the pants and joking, and it's very obvious that everybody's grown up. And then it jumps where you see Albert getting some sort of postcard and then going off and writing something. You don't quite know what's going on. And then then you have a scene where Albert, Shug, Sophia, Harpo, I think there may be a few other people there, basically on the front porch of Celie'S house, and Nellie comes with her husband and the children. So they, and that's how it ends. It ends with them, Celie running out into the field and her and Nellie calling out their names and them hugging and kneeling in this field of purple flowers. So, and I believe, I'm trying to think if I mentioned this, I have a small child, she doesn't sleep very well, my brain doesn't always work, but they had showed in some of the back letters that Adam, and I think it was both Olivia and the little girl that Olivia they basically grew up with, got their face cut. And so I'm trying to think, they show the cheek cuttings on them, basically it's like disfigurement. But they do have Adam not speaking English very well. I think he speaks just a bit, and as well as does Olivia. Now they're adults, and both Nellie and Celie are obviously everybody's much older. And they do a decent job of making the actresses and actors look a bit older. So, and that's how it ends. Okay, so now let's go back and see what the heck they cut out. Now, one of the things Spielberg cuts out, and he regrets it, is Shug and Celie have a love affair. So it's barely touched on. You can kind of get a sense of it, but it's more of a mentor thing in the film. In the book, it's a love affair. It's not shy about it. Celie starts having a crush on Shug when she sees pictures of her before she's sent to live with Albert, because basically she finds out that he's in love with her before he's sent to live with her. And she falls in love with these photographs, and then falls in love with the woman despite how horribly she treats her when Celie first meets her. And she's treated like crap. Mind you, she's treating everybody like crap, and Albert's obsessed. So both Albert and Celie are in love with the same woman. And yes, Albert does, I'm pretty sure Shug is bisexual, because she has sex with both men and women. And so they cut that out completely. The other thing they cut out completely is most of Nellie's story. Now, you don't hear about this until much later, until Shug has come back with Grady, and they find she's having a conversation with Celie one day when the men are out doing something, getting drunk possibly. I think that's what they're doing. And Shug always goes to the mailbox with Albert to get the mail, and she's noticed they would have weird looking stamps on them. So they go and find these letters from Africa, and you get the whole backstory of Nellie going to Corinne and Samuel, who were the missionaries that she ends up with, that Celie had sent her to, because one, Corinne was the only wealthy black woman she'd seen, and she believes that she saw her daughter Olivia with her. She'd actually talked to Corinne before. And so Nellie had gone to them, and you get the whole backstory is how she ended up in Africa with them, and her story of them traveling and going to New York, and a whole huge chunk of the book, and them going to London and Lisbon and the entire voyage, and them ending up in this village and everything, where Corinne starts distrusting Nellie's relationship. Eventually it comes out when Corinne is dying, they have to work very, very hard to convince her that Nellie is the children's aunt. She did not have an affair with Samuel, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And then, of course, Corinne dies. It also skips over the road coming and the English plantation owner taking over, them planting rubber trees and pretty much everything going belly up. for these native people. Their village is destroyed. They're having to pay money to water and wells that used to belong to them. Their farms are destroyed, and they're forced to essentially become indentured servants to the English landowner of the land, growing copper trees and harvesting rubber trees. And essentially they become indentured servants on rubber plantations on their former land, and they start dying, and there's a whole malaria thing and sickle cell anemia thing going on here. And they skip over this entire story. And you see something else that they show in the film. It looks like Adam and Olivia get these African cuts when they're kids. In the book, what happens, they're adults at this point. The girl, who's a friend of Olivia, is also in love with Adam and gets this done as adults. And the village don't start doing this as a way to mark their tribal people, because their world has been turned upside down, and they're doing anything to hold on to their old ways. They're also doing FGM, which is female genital mutilation. That picks up, even though the ministers are trying to get that to stop. And they still are. That still has not changed. I'm not going to go into detail. I took a class on it, or on violence against women when I was an undergrad. It's not pretty. But it is brought up in the book, and they cut that out completely. They cut out almost all of Nellie's story. They show them getting these cuts on their face when they're kids, when the reality it happens when they're adults. And it also, one of the other fun things I find really funny at the end of this is Adam and Olivia grew up speaking English. They were American. They spoke English. Their parents spoke English. I do not know if they spoke the African language. They may have. It's never mentioned. But they speak perfect English. They've been to London. They were not babies when they went to Africa. They were, I think, like 7 and 8. So the fact that they show Adam and Olivia barely speaking English at the end of this book is really, really funny. It makes no sense. No sense at all. They may have accents, but again, they speak perfect English. Because again, they were around their parents, and Nellie, who their primary people who were in their life, spoke perfect English, and they went back. They don't show this either. Again, the entire Nellie's story completely cut out, where after Nellie and Samuel, after Karina's death, with the children, go back to London to plead to get help for their village people, and nobody gets it out. So, and that's when they come back and they found out the cutting happened with Adam's girlfriend, and he gets it done too, in order to, again, they're adults at this point, in order so she would marry him and come back to the United States with him. So, the other thing they cut out is they show Mr. getting a telegram. What actually happens is the telegram is in fact sent to, it's sent to Albert, who by this time he's friends with Celie, that they died as trying to get back home. It's from the State Department, where they're bombed by, I think, one of the German U-boats. So she thinks maybe they're dead or not. And then all of Celie, who had been writing to Nellie after she got those letters, were sent back to her. So they skip over that too. Again, they skip over literally about half the book. And then the other thing they skip over completely is Celie's time in Nashville. So they show her leaving with Grady and Squeak and Shug, and then they jump to her being on this train, strange transition to her getting her family home. What happens in the book is she goes to Tennessee, and she works with Shug. She starts making pants to make a living, as well as taking care of Shug, and Shug actually being able to cook very, very well. And you see Shug eating, she comes back from eating on the road, she eats crappy, and she's not healthy at all. Grady and Squeak, or Mary Agnes, leave to sell reefer, get very, very into the marijuana, and go to Panama to run a marijuana plantation. And then Mary Agnes, or Squeak, very nice names, goes back and forth, comes back and goes back to Harpo and her children, and kind of gives all that up and decides to raise her child, and who was actually, I think, now being raised by Sophia and Harpo. There's a whole big thing about one of Sophia and Harpo's young daughters having sickle cell anemia. They do not say those words, but they describe the bloody disease and the fact that they can't catch malaria. And then they mention that, and it corresponds with some of the conversations that Nellie has in her letters, talking about African disease and them not being able to eat these yams, which protects them either from sickle cell anemia or malaria. Can't remember which. Not even sure it's specified, but it protects them, in that basically everybody's dropping like flies because they're dying of malaria because the yams used to protect them for some reason. It's not specified why, but again, that's what it says. And they skip all of this is skipped over. So it just skips over her entire time in Tennessee, and then Shug running off with some young kid to travel over the United States and leaving Celie heartbroken. So then Celie's back. They get a whole, basically she'd gotten a letter from Nellie detailing the whole story of who their father was and what actually happened, as opposed to the film where it's told by the widow in the car. So Celie gets, in the book, she gets a call from this woman who, 2 weeks after this guy died, they go and talk to the lawyer. It's like, yeah, you get the money, but the house and the store and the land don't belong to you. It belonged to this guy. It passed to his wife when she died. And when she died, it passed to her kids, and her kids are still alive. So that's how Celie, in the book, it happens. And then she gets this phone call. So she suddenly has land and store and a home, and her stepfather has torn down the house that she grew up in and built this big fancy thing. And the young wife takes all the furniture because he had it basically built in Europe for her. So somehow he becomes really, really wealthy. He also has a white man working in the store for him, and that's not shown either. So you skip over all of that. So the film is very, very pared down. You miss a lot of the nuance. You miss a lot of the story. You miss two major cities, Tennessee and then or Nashville, that whole thing. And then you pretty much miss out on all of Nellie's story completely. You get some bare bone stuff that doesn't entirely make sense just through some brief letters that Celie reads. So they lose a lot. Now, yeah, I can see them having to pare it down, but some of the transitions don't make sense because you have no idea what the heck Celie's been doing all this time after she leaves Albert. They also show Albert losing everything before he starts cleaning up. You don't really get that. Celie comes back with Shug to visit, and Hayden's already started cleaning up his act and learning to cook and cleaning himself up because essentially he's alone. His kids are all grown up. They don't want anything to do with him. I think his daughters have gotten really, really into religion and won't have anything to do with him. I don't know what's going on with his sons besides Harpo, who's again married, and you have a bunch of grandchildren and illegitimate kids running around. And then some of Sophia kids have grown up. You also skip out on the fact that Sophia was living below the sheriff, Sophia being in prison, and them getting, with Squeak's help through some of her connections, getting her out of prison and essentially becoming a slave to this white family and raising these kids, and the daughter becoming very, very obsessed with her and not going away. So, and just becoming really, really obsessed. It's very, very weird, this relationship, because Sophia kind of raised her, but doesn't really care. It's like, I was your parents' slave, essentially. I was living in a room below your house. I don't love your kid. I just don't. Go away. As nicely as she can. And that's essentially, Sophia has no love for this child. And this young girl, little white girl, is obsessed with her. It's kind of funny. But that's all really skipped over. You get a little bit of it. And the craziness of this little white woman, who's played by an amazing actress. I can't remember. Pull it up. Who the heck it plays? Who's the actress who plays it? I'm going to jump over here. Let's see. I think, where is it? It's Dana Robbins, who's an award Award-winning actress who's been in a lot of things. She's very well known, and she plays Miss Millie. So you get a little bit of that, but it's not really clear. So the movie cuts down a lot. I can get why they have to, but as good as Spielberg is, he does not do the book justice, and that's what the author thinks. I mean, that's pretty much Alice Walker. She I think in some of what I've read, she hates the Oklahoma-like beginning where you're seeing all these fields and stuff. Like, but when she saw it basically with the audience, she realized they loved it. It's like, yes, this is she sees it, it's a good film on its own, but she sees it very disconnected from her book, which makes a lot of sense. Because again, they cut out at least half the book. And the nuances and a lot of the messages of the story here. And then there's that whole weird singing scene with Suge and her father. Her parents are mentioned once in the entire book, basically. Early on, when she comes sick, near death, they don't explain what the heck she's sick from. It's never explained at all, and her parents won't have anything to do with her. And that's it. I think it may have mentioned her father's a minister, but they're mentioned. They're not actually in the book at all, from what I can remember. So yes, Suge does not try to kiss up to her parents or her father in a church or huge thing. There's no real major church scene at all with that. And again, they cut out, the love affair, and more of just how violent Mr. is, let alone how, essentially violent their father, the stepfather is, or the fact that their biological father was lynched and their mother went nuts. Yeah, she went very, very crazy and was taken advantage by this man who essentially raped her. Never actually legally married her. He raped her. That's, of course, why the other reason everything didn't go to him when she dies, because he wasn't legally married to her. He was essentially hiding on that land. And yes, Celie does confront him, and no, she can't really do anything about it because he don't give a damn. And he's a man, she's a woman, and she doesn't have any power. Because it's like the 1920s, 1930s at this point. It also, I don't think it really gets the passage of time. Again, when I looked this up, because there's no real set time period, you definitely get a feel it's the 1920s when Celie's a young adult. So when I looked it up, I think even the Cliff Notes guess that the book starts around 1910 and finishes right around the early 1940s. So, and that's kind of what they're guessing. Again, World War I is mentioned briefly with U-boats, kind of near the end there. Or maybe it's talking about World War II, the early parts of it. So that's when this is set. So you do definitely get the 1920s feel and a little bit of the 1930s feel, but there's a lot of talk of marijuana. They call it reefer. That's what it's referred to. You miss out on Grady going to Panama and a whole bunch of other stuff. So the film is very, very good. I'm not going to ditch on the film, but it cuts out a lot of the book. So it was done decently for the time. And again, Spielberg, nobody's debating he's a great director. And nobody's going to argue that. It's Spielberg, for God's sake. He's well known. This is probably not the last film I'm going to talk about with him. It's probably one of the last films I'm going to talk about would be Goldberg, and I can't remember anything else that I would use her in that's child appropriate. But this is a great film. I would not, similar if you watch my book review, I'm not going to show this to anybody younger than maybe middle school. And that's the youngest. They're not going to get anything out of it. There's a lot of swearing, there's a lot of alcohol, there's violence going on there. It's obviously far more pared down than the book. Yeah, don't go near into that book. I can't speak for African Americans, but I still wouldn't go near into that book in middle school. I would wait to high school, because there's a lot of violence going on here, and there's There's stuff that they're just not going to understand until they're a little bit older, with some of the politics and the stuff that's going on there. I don't think it would be interesting to them, but that's my opinion. That's my personal opinion as a white woman who doesn't know anything about the African American experience. Not going to go there. Not my culture. That's for people. I'm sure this book is a bloody classic. It won some massive prizes, not the film. The film won some massive prizes too, but the book is better. So, in fact, it's probably highly award winning in the book. But again, getting back to the point, the book can be very, very violent. And again, there's a lot of different stuff that's going on there that probably wouldn't interest a kid unless they were maybe in the high school age. Not just the violence and stuff, but the lesbian relationship. Not that it's bad, it's not, I'm an ally here, but there's some also graphic sex scenes to an extent. And particularly rape in this book going on here between, and then she ends up being friends with him. That is, they get this right in both the film and the book. At the end of this story, despite the fact that he beat the crap out of her, pretty much used her as a slave and as a sex doll, Celie and Albert are friends at the end of this book and the film. And it'll show that they are friends at the end of this book, which it's a tad bit mind-boggling to me. But again, he's not evil. He's just what he is. He's a product of the world in which he lives in, and the male patriarchy and the society where they live, and the fact that his life sucks. Yeah, the other thing they skip out on is an explanation with his first wife. She was killed on her way either to or from church by her lover. Yeah, infidelity is a big thing in this book. And I'm not sure if Grady and Sugar are actually legally married. They may be. Not sure on that. It's not shown that he's, in the book, he's a great deal younger than her and very much taking advantage of her because she has a bunch of money. I mean, they kind of show that. They kind of show her cleaned up. But no, she's touring and singing in clubs and making money. And she has a nice house in Nashville. And essentially it's implied that she's wealthy for an African American woman. And that implies that Celie becomes wealthy. And they cut out her actually making the pants and employing people in Suge's house and making a decent business out of making these pants. So, and yeah. But again, the film, back to the point, there's a huge difference here. And I am not an expert and probably could not do the proper comparisons to this. Check out my book review if you want a more detailed of the book. The film is very good. It's very pared down. It's a mediocre adaptation at best, but given the time period of which it's filmed and the limitations of film at the time, obviously, if they ever remake it, they could probably make it a mini-series, and it would make more sense because, again, there's a lot to digest in those books and in that book, and they have to cut out a lot to fit a proper runtime. And obviously people enjoy this film a lot because it did very, very well in the box office. It was loved by critics. It got a bunch of Golden Globes, and it was nominated like crazy for the Oscars. Didn't win a damn thing, probably because a lot of people in this film, pretty much all of them, were black, and it was the 1980s and Oscars, and they were having issues recently with being far too white. So again, this is 1984, so they were still pretty white. I do believe Whoopi Goldberg now sits on the board, which is kind of funny. But Whoopi Goldberg doesn't do a lot of acting these days anyway, any more than Oprah, who, yes, she can act. At least she could. I think she was in one other film later after she sold her soul to being a talk show host and promoting, again, charlatans. I don't like Oprah. Is that clear? I really, really don't like Oprah. Kind of similar to I don't like Disney. But again, great film. Highly recommended. High school, maybe middle school would be the youngest, but I would show this film. the book, don't go anywhere near until you're in high school. Just don't. I mean, if you have a very, very mature middle schooler, but I don't know if they'd enjoy it. And that's my personal opinion. I love this book. I love the color palette. I enjoy the film. Both of them are fantastic. But again, very definitely mature audiences. I'm trying to think what this film is rated. If it's going to, it's PG-13. So yeah, again, late middle school, early high school is when they're recommending this because of probably strong language and all sorts of interesting things. So again, I will link a copy of this film in the description. And there is apparently a musical. They did do a stage musical, which I was not aware of until it was popped up on a Reddit thread I follow for books. And they're turning it into a film, the musical, which should be interesting. If I get a chance to see that, I will probably review it just because I love the book. I love the film. But again, two separate entities, and that the author agrees with that. So that is it for this review. If you like what you see, again, if you haven't already, like and subscribe, check out my review of the book, The Color Purple, fantastic book. This is January, so I'm doing African American history as well as Asian American history because it's African American History Month. And it's Lunar New Year, so I'm doing both. I'm going to be doing the Joy Luck Club. I believe that should be coming out next week, and then I'm doing the film as well. Those are the adult, teen, advanced books and films that I'm covering this month. The rest of the African American books that I'm covering are children's books, talking picture books here. So I think I have 3 of those off the top of my head. It's either 2 or 3, I can't remember exactly. So, and I'm getting covered along with a few other things. Last month I did some food reviews, looked at some blogs, some cookbooks, I believe a YouTube channel as well. Next month I'm doing some springy stuff because it's March. I did Christmas stuff in December, I did Harry Potter in September through October, and I did a bunch of classical stuff in October when it comes to books, and a bunch of other stuff. So if you like what you see, I have a bunch of book reviews, children's film reviews, a little bit of sprinkling of secular and again non-religious homeschooling stuff, some kids travel stuff, and a whole bunch more to come. I cover a lot. Mostly it's book reviews. I'm doing a sprinkling of a few other things and have a bunch more planned. So like and subscribe. Thank you.